Why was Reagan the perfect scapegoat for the punk movement, you think? While the imagery, flyers, album covers, zines frequently depicted Reagan as a Nazi, what specific policies led this generation to see him as fascistic? Were some in the scene guilty of jumping on the Reagan as content bandwagon a little bit?
It's like 4 questions there, so let's see if I can get them one at a time. So why Reagan? I think Reagan was an easy target, right? He's like your nice old grandpa, right? But you see him and you're like, you represent everything that I don't want maybe as a youth, right? I don't want simplicity. I don't want nicety, right? I don't want, the 1950s life. And what we know about the 1980s is, we began to see young people seriously become disaffected, particularly white male suburbanites, right? Which really afforded them some agency when it came to this type of music. I think Reagan was easy, right? He was always out there. He was probably the most prominent figure available for these kids to see, whether it was on television or in the newspapers at the time. And so I think it's like, well, he really represents the parent rental generation. So we really don't like our parents right now. They've left us at home. We're all latchkey kids. And so, let's just go after him. And yeah, I do think a lot of the bands during that time period did kind of jump on board, right? One of the songs I talk about in the book is Chronic Sick, and their song Reagan Bands, which was hard to make out the lyrics, but you can really tell that they're kind of making fun of all of the Reagan bands during the time that just kept, harping on about Reagan. Yeah, I think it was a pretty easy target for young people at the time to go, yep, that guy, we're going to go after him, and then from there, I think you started to see some bands go a little bit deeper, right, and start to dig into some of those individuals on the periphery, right, and so that would get into maybe people like Jerry Falwell, right, and the Moral Majority to start to take aim, things like that. You even see some songs, look at Alexander Haig, right, or Ed Meese, right, but I think Reagan was the easiest person for those kids to go after and attack.
Do you see 84 as a kind of a moment of defeat for the hardcore scene? I know you weren't quote unquote in it at 84, but now looking back, for me, when I look at 84, that's a moment where some of the bands are starting to fall apart. Some of the styles are starting to change a little bit.
Yep.
84 to me, I see it as the year those guys realized that their movement really wasn't what they thought it was.
I think you're right, to an extent. I almost stopped the book at 85, right? Wow. And so, yep. When we were originally writing it, it was like, let's just do 81 or maybe 80, right? When Reagan started to come on the scene, but let's stop it at 85 because I don't know if I want to say that, punk failed, right? Because Reagan was reelected in 84. But there is definitely a shift a little bit, but I don't necessarily think it's connected to Reagan's election victory. I just think that punk hardcore in particular, started to get a little bit formulaic, right? And even I fell victim of that trap, right? I mean, I began to think like, and somebody popped up there on the chat, talked about like the second great wave of hardcore. And I loved all those bands, but part of the reason I loved all those bands is because all those bands sounded so similar to one another, right? I could get a Gorilla Biscuits, or I could get a Judge, or I could get a Bold, or I could get a Youth of Today, talking about the straight edge hardcore tapes around, 85 to 89-ish. And I knew what I was getting at that time. Whereas if you take a look at the bands from 81 to 85 that I looked at, I mean, they're all over the place. Some of them, I wouldn't even go so far as to say that they sound hardcore, right? There's still maybe, kind of punk elements to it. But I don't think it was crap. Reagan got reelected. We failed. Let's stop doing what we're doing. I just think it was, hardcore got a little formulaic, the same things being said kind of over and over and over again. But then also, thrash really came in to play at that time, and you started to see a lot of crossover bands, Suicidal Tendencies, DRI, SOD and MOD, right? These were kind of bands that maybe started in the punk area, and then
Cro-Mags.
Yep, same thing. So I just think with the popularity of metal by 85-ish, right? I think a lot of punk bands are like, hey, we can do that, and we can play bigger venues, right? Or we can get bigger audiences. Let's stop playing in the tiny little dumpy ass clubs saying Reagan sucks, right? And let's start doing something a little bit bigger, a little bit different.